Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. So today I am super excited to share with you all my first impressions of the Pat McGrath Subversive Palette. So let me just open this for you guys here. Isn't that such a gorgeous palette? So recently Pat McGrath was having a 25% off sale on her website, and so I couldn't resist but pick up a Mothership palette. I've been eyeing the Subversive palette for a while now, and I figured this was a perfect way to kind of shake things up a little bit since recently I've been mainly just doing kind of pinky purple looks. And obviously there are pinks and purples in here, but you can see there's like a much more diverse color story than what we've been seeing. And I think it's a lot more kind of grungy rather than romantic. So I'm really excited for the kinds of looks this palette will produce. And I was actually so excited for this 25% off sale that I actually also picked up the Decadence palette. So stay tuned for a specialized video on this palette. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so you'll be notified when this video comes out. Originally, I was actually going to try to do more of a joint video with the Subversive and the Decadence palettes because realistically, I wanted to try both of them the day I got them. But I don't know if you guys can see this on camera, but in the Decadence palette I got in this Lapis Luxury shade, there are these kind of bubbles in the eyeshadow. And so that kind of freaked me out, and I've emailed Pat McGrath's customer service team, so hopefully they get back to me soon about what this is. And honestly, hopefully they just send me a new one, because even if this is still safe to use, like, you know, looking at those little bubbles and stuff, I have trypophobia, so I really hate seeing like little bubbles clustered together. If you guys have ever gotten eyeshadow, and particularly any Pat McGrath eyeshadows with this sort of effect, please let me know, like, is this okay to use? And you know, what happened after you got that kind of eyeshadow? Because that's never happened to me before, and it's really not what I would expect from a Pat McGrath Mothership palette, since these are kind of the top of the line eyeshadows. So yeah, kind of disappointed about that, to say the least, but hopefully they can send me a new version and then I can film a video for you guys with a nice clean palette that doesn't have any weird bubbles in it. And so for today's video, we're just gonna focus on this beautiful Subversive palette since it came intact without any sort of issues. And the story for me and this palette is kind of interesting in that when I first started looking into Pat McGrath eyeshadows, this was actually the palette I assumed that I would be least interested in, just because the color story, as the name suggests, is much more of that kind of deep and grungy style, so not necessarily some of the more soft and romantic looks that I often do. But recently, I think as I've got to more into makeup, I've really been craving just like a wider array of different kinds of looks that I can do. So this palette went from being the Mothership palette I was least interested in to the one that I definitely wanted to pick up next. I was really excited to see the 25% off sale, and that's not necessarily the best sale that Pat McGrath ever has. She does sometimes have 30% sales, and also you can often combine a coupon code during her sales to get an additional 10% off. I failed to do that this time, unfortunately. Please check coupon codes when you are buying from Pat McGrath's websites, because sometimes they actually do layer on to existing sales. And so at this point in my Pat McGrath collection process, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna eventually collect all of the palettes. And so that's why I went ahead and bought 2 of them this time. But I am super excited about this palette because I think it'll just be really different than a lot of the looks that I've been doing lately, and encourage me to be a bit more creative with my eyeshadow. So without further ado, let's go into some swatches. So let me just first peel this off. There we go. Nice, beautiful beveled mirror there. Alrighty, so the first shade we have here is Skin Show Fever. And all of Pat McGrath's palettes start with a Skin Show shade. And this one has much more of kind of an orangey golden undertone to it compared to her other Skin Show shades. The next shade is Night Creature, which is a gorgeous purple fuchsia shade. Wow, so sparkly, really a standout shade in this palette. Next, we have Deep Shade, which, as its name suggests, is a beautiful, deep fairly cool toned brown. And I think this is the primary transition shade in this palette. So if you have a lighter skin tone, you might want to dip out into another palette for your transition shade. Next, we have Gigabyte, which is a gorgeous green khaki gold shade. Ooh, okay, very textured. Wow, look at that shine. I love how it has kind of this almost black base to it, but then it has this gorgeous green shine that goes all the way to gold. Next, we have VR Pink. And wow, this is a really, really fascinating shade. I don't know if you guys can see that flip clearly, but it kind of flips from almost an orangey shade to a really beautiful ballet slipper pink. So that's the first row. And then the second row starts with Extreme Black. And so this is the same shade in all of Pat McGrath's first 3 palettes. So if you have Subliminal or Sublime, you'll have the same shade. And this is just really your perfect, very deep black shade. Great for deepening any look or using as a liner. Next, we have Lazarus, and this is a gorgeous minky toned brown. So this is a metallic, but has more of almost a satin finish. And I feel like I get hints of red and orange when I move this shade along. So it definitely is overall kind of a cool toned brown, but it has a little bit of red and orange as well. Next, we have Black Metal, and this is, I think, one of the most fascinating shades in the palette because it has that black base to it, but then it has this really gorgeous icy glitter in it. So very, very multi-dimensional. Next, we have Blitz Amethyst, and this is a beautiful shade that also has kind of a deep base, but the glitter in this case is a beautiful dual chrome that kind of goes from periwinkle to lavender. So very nicely reflective and multi-dimensional. And then the final shade is Astral Ghost Orchid. So this is one of her glitter topper shades. And in this case, the reflect is kind of a pinky lavender. I don't know if you guys can see that very clearly. Let me try to maybe layer more on my finger. Okay, yeah, I think you can see the reflectivity there a little bit better. And this shade feels a little bit drier and chunkier than her other Blitz Astral shades, which is kind of interesting. Not sure if that's because of the formulation or if this palette's on the older side, but it's really beautiful. So here we are with all of the shadows swatched. So now I am super excited to try these guys out on my lids. And just as a quick PSA, I just tried washing off the swatches and I noticed that I think this was Extreme Black and this was Night Creature. They do kind of stain your skin a little bit. Like not that much, but just in case that's something you're worried about, it was pretty hard for me to try to scrub those off. So without further ado, let's get into today's eyeshadow look. So to start off, I'm gonna try this deep shade on my fluffy Wayne Goss number 16. And I think this is going to be a little bit deep as a transition shade for me, but we'll try it out. I'm gonna do my best to just lightly build this up. Okay, yeah, definitely a little bit on the deeper side, so slightly harder for me to blend out. Okay, I'm trying to build this up, but I will say that I am having a lot of issues with patchiness. I don't know if you guys can clearly see that, but it isn't really laying down in smooth layers. Like here you can definitely see kind of some catching in this area. Alrighty, so not the best initial application, but let's just keep going and see how things build. So I'm gonna go into Extreme Black and just use a little bit of that in the outer part of the eye to kind of build up more intensity. Wow, okay, this is very, very pigmented. Should have known that from Subliminal, but wow. Okay, I am definitely struggling quite a bit with blending these mattes out. But it's okay, we're gonna go ahead with some shimmer and then maybe I'll return to the mattes later and further blend them out. I'm gonna take some of this Lazarus shade now and see how this looks kind of just all over the outer crease, whether this kind of can help cover up some of the shoddy blending that I did. Okay, yeah, I think that's helping quite a bit. I do really like this shade. Okay, I think that was helpful in that Lazarus and Deep shade are kind of similar, except with Lazarus being in a shimmer formula, so I feel like they blended together quite nicely. So now with that same wing gloss number 4, I'm gonna go into this black metal shade and see if I can use this in just kind of the outer third of the eyelid. Okay, this is applying despite the fluffiness of this brush. I think normally this would probably be better with either a stiffer brush or with a finger, but I'm trying to like keep it a little bit light since it's in the outer corner. Alrighty, so now I'm gonna go into Night Creature, and I'm gonna put this all over the inner 2/3 of the eye. This is with my Chikuhodo GSN 9. This is actually a very flaky shade. I wonder if, let me try actually applying this with a finger. Okay, yeah, I think it definitely lays more opaquely with a finger. So now I'll just take the brush with a little bit of that to refine the edges. And then to bring some more sparkle, I'm gonna take Blitz Amethyst in the center and try to layer this on top. Ooh, wow, okay. This is a lot more pigmented than I anticipated. I thought this would be more like a glitter topper, but this is definitely a dense shade in and of itself. So it's gonna get its own special placement in the middle third. Taking the GSN 9 again, I'm just going to try to blend these shades together and prevent any harsh lines. I will say all of these shades are very flaky. So usually in my other Pat McGrath palettes, they're more kind of creamy metallic shades in addition to the glittery shades. But this is by and large mostly very glittery shades. So next, because we can't have enough sparkle, I'm gonna go into VR Ghost Orchid and just further, just lightly scatter that in the inner 2/3. See what kind of party that brings. As I mentioned during the swatches, this one is definitely a lot chunkier than the other VR shades. Okay, so I definitely think that brought a lot more shine to this look. In general, I feel like my eyes are really, really glowing at the moment. So again, I'm just gonna refine the edges a little bit. So now for the lower lash line. With my ESMG 27 brush, I'm gonna go into Deep shade and just kind of drag that all along the lower lash line. Taking some extreme black, I'm just gonna put that in the outer thirds. And now since we haven't used Gigabyte yet, I'm going to drag this across the inner 2/3 of my lower lash line. Whoa, this is also very, very flaky. Quite the shimmer payoff. And then I'm just gonna take some black metal for the outer third. And for the inner corner, I'm gonna take my Refer number 3 brush and go into VR Pink and see if I can just layer this here. Oh wow, this actually has a lot more of a pink shade than what I was anticipating, given that in pan it looks very orange, or I guess it shifts a lot. You can see here it looks just very pink straight on. And now with my mini booster, I'm going into Skin Show Fever and using that as a brow bone highlight. So here are all of the eyeshadows on my face. I managed to use all 10 eyeshadows in this palette. So now I'm gonna go ahead and finish off my look and be right back. So I went in with my M Cosmetics brush liner and then my bronzer from Charlotte Tilbury in the shade Tan. And then for blush, I used my new Patrick Ta She's Passionate Velvet Blush. And for lips today, I went in with Structure from Pat McGrath and then Amorosa from Natasha Denona. So now to finish off today's look, I'm gonna go in with Skin Show Fever as a highlighter. So I'm just going to brush this along the high points of my cheeks. Shade is a little bit intense as a highlighter, but I think it still works. So here is the completed look. What do you guys think? In terms of my initial impressions of this palette, overall, I would say I am quite excited that I think this palette brings a lot of additional shades to my collection that I don't have already, and I think this will really challenge me to kind of go out of my comfort zone and put together some more dramatic looks. Today's look is definitely pretty intense and definitely not my typical look. It's very, very shimmery. I think in the future, I would not use all 10 of these in a look, most likely. I think I would probably try to make it just slightly more monochromatic or a little bit less shimmery. Today we definitely have glitter on shimmer on shimmer. And overall, I would say this palette definitely runs a lot more glittery than my other Pat McGrath palettes and has some more intensely textured shades. So as I mentioned earlier, in most Pat McGrath palettes, I find there's at least 2 or 3 kind of more metallic leaning shades, whereas here I would say this is the only shade that has more of a metallic or satin finish that you can use kind of as a matte in your crease in addition to kind of laying it on with a finger. The rest of the shades in this palette I would definitely encourage kind of packing on either with a finger or a wet brush or just a really dense brush. Like where Night Creature and Black Metal are in this palette, usually there would be more of your standard metallic formulas, so it's interesting that she swapped them out for much more glittery formulas. And then also these Blitz Astral shades, I would say, are more chunky than her typical Blitz Astral shades. And I noticed this especially with the Astral Ghost Orchid shade, where the flakes are just very, very sizable and kind of don't really lay flat in the same way that her other Blitz Astral shades do. So just to provide you guys a point of comparison of what I mean by this different formula. So in Subliminal, there's this Astral White shade, which I have on my middle finger, and you can see that it's much more smooth in texture in comparison to Astral Ghost Orchid, which is very much like a chunky glitter. So whereas the particles in Astral White can kind of lay flat on your lid and sort of create a slightly more opaque layer, the particles in Astral Ghost Orchid are just really sparse and chunky. So that's kind of interesting to me because these two palettes came out at the same time. So I'm kind of surprised that the formulation is so different. It's not necessarily that one is better or worse, but it's just a very different formula. And I guess I'm not used to this kind of super chunky type of glitter. Personally, I think I might prefer something that's just a little bit smoother. But I mean, I do think this adds a very stark effect on the lids. So I guess that's kind of the trade-off. In general, I would say this is probably the least everyday friendly of the Pat McGrath palettes, at least that I have tried. I don't really think you can build a really everyday look unless you're gonna just use, say, Skin Show Fever and Lazarus and nothing else. But that's okay. That's not the purpose of this. It's called Subversive for a reason. It's 4 days when you want to do something that is much more artistic, that is much more colorful. And so I appreciate that. I think for me personally, I'm gonna have to spend a lot more time with this to figure out what kind of looks I like best, just because this is so different from my typical eyeshadow color story. And I think maybe it'll be helpful for me to combine this with Subliminal. I think these two will actually be a really helpful pairing together because for one, Subliminal has a lot more of these lighter shades that I think can help blend out the crease area a little bit better. Like for example, I think Ultimate Taupe in Subliminal would probably be my ideal start to the look as a transition shade, and then I could go into deep shade here and, you know, layer on some additional shimmers there. Similarly, I think Astral White from Subliminal will probably go really well with a lot of these shades, since I think that blue reflect would pair well with green, purple, or blue, so really any of these shades. So overall, I would say I'm quite excited about this palette and about mixing and matching it with my other Pat McGrath palettes. The textures are definitely very different from what I am used to with my other Pat McGrath palettes, so I think there's gonna be a little bit of a learning curve. And as you guys saw, I was really struggling with the two matte shades here. So hopefully that's just because I need to work with these a little bit more. I have no trouble with my mattes in my other Pat McGrath palettes, and presumably these should all be the same formulas. So it might just be that these shades are a little bit deeper, particularly this one. So maybe if I start with a lighter shade underneath, it'll be better. I think the overall look looks quite nice despite the initial blending issues I had. And I think these colors all pair very well together, even though it's a very divergent color story compared to my other Pat McGrath palettes. But I think this is a pretty fun look and a pretty fun palette overall. So that's it for today's video, and thank you all so much for joining me. Please let me know down below what your favorite Pat McGrath palette is, because I'm starting to get to the point where I almost have all of them, so I'm really curious which ones you guys like the best. And also, if you guys have any intel about this whole like bubbling situation, please let me know about that too, because I am kind of sketched out, and I'll also update you guys in terms of what I hear back from the Pat McGrath customer service team. So if you liked today's video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so you can be up to date with all of my new video releases. Thank you all so much for taking time to join me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!